So hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest seminar series. We're so honored and privileged to have Michel with us. Michel is a senior fellow at CIGI, where he contributes his expertise in the area of standards for big data and artificial intelligence. His research strives to drive dialogue on what standards are, why they matter in these emerging sectors of the economy, and how to incorporate them into regulatory and procurement frameworks. He highlights issues that should be examined in the design of new technical standards governing big data and AI in order to ensure that we have both innovation while also respecting privacy, security, and ethical considerations. In addition, Michel provides standardization advice to help innovative companies in their efforts to access international markets. He contributes to CIO Strategy Council standardization activities and advises CPA of Canada on data governance issues. So he holds a PhD and master's degree from the University of Ottawa. We're so fortunate to have him speak. And with that said, Michel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. So we have about an hour and 15 minutes, I guess, total now. Do you need any time for questions at the end?
We can leave any time that you want, Michel. We're not structured to have specific times. Whatever works best for you, we'll maybe let the questions come up as they come. If anybody has any questions, please raise their hand or start a chat dialogue. I'll be here monitoring the chat as always.
Okay, perfect. So what I'll do then is I have, let me check here. I have 35 slides. So I'd like to spend about an hour talking to you about digital technologies and governance, and I want to use the concept of data value chains to try to put it in kind of a visual format for you, because we're just starting, right? Canada is along with other developed countries. We're just starting to think about this new world as organizations, go through digital transformation, and it is a revolution. But the institutions and the systems and the controls are not developed yet. They haven't kept pace with this maelstrom of development. So it's a very interesting space to be in right now. So I wish I was your age and coming to school and developing new algorithms, because there's a lot of really neat stuff happening. So what I'm going to be talking to you today about is based on a series of sources. Some of them come from CIGI. As you know, CIGI is based in Waterloo. It was founded by Jim Balsillie. Jim was one of the co-founders of Research in Motion, the BlackBerry. So Jim has always been concerned about the issues associated with digitization, and he helped basically foster policy thinking on data governance and digital governance. So you'll see some sources coming from CIGI, and I've also added sources coming from CPA Canada. So you'll see from time to time in the presentation some images from CPA Canada. So if you keep the presentation after today, if you get a copy of it, you can easily access the CPA Canada website. And if you go to the various sources that I present here, you'll be able to download either articles that I wrote or reports that provides guidance on digital governance. So you have a little bit of collateral here to use if ever you're interested in thinking through, as you go into the marketplace and get working, thinking through how would data governance look like in the organization I work in, because it's a work in progress. So today's presentation really is about the issues I present here in my on the slide. So I want to talk to you about digital transformation. I want to talk about governance. Clearly, it's important if we want to if you want to make progress, if we don't want regulations to stop everything because, the risk and the trust disappear. I want to use AI as a use case of governance because there are new regulations and standards now being implemented, developed around the world. So let's use AI, but we could use robotics, we could use crypto or blockchain. We could use a lot of different use cases to demonstrate that you still need data governance to make it work. So we're going to use AI as the use case to take a look at what's happening in terms of standards and regulations. And then I want to introduce to you this concept of data value chains that I think you'll be finding useful. And at the end, some steps that you want to consider as you undertake this basically this digital transformation through a roadmap. So hopefully you learn something from this. I hope I'm going to pace myself so that I don't download too much information down at you guys, because obviously there's a lot of stuff here. So as I said, CPA Canada and CIGI were two important sources of information, but I also used information from an organization to the right of the slide here, from the CIO Strategy Council. So it's the Chief Information Officers Strategy Council. They're there for creating tools to better manage digital governance. On Monday, this organization is going to get renamed in Toronto. It's going to be called the Digital Governance Council. So I invite you to take a look at their website after Monday if you're interested in standards and guidance to better manage governance issues, whether it's AI or digital identity or the professional credentials of people in data value chains. It's a very good source of information, and their standards are free as well. So you can go on their website and download their standards. You don't have to pay for them. Other sources come from Canada. At the bottom of this slide here to the right, there is a document from the Standards Council of Canada. It's called a standardization roadmap. It's a 200 pages document. It has every single standard that has been published before 2022 on anything related to data and governance, nationally and internationally. So if you're looking for interoperability standards, or what type of standards are there to manage privacy issues, or data collection and labeling, that is a very interesting source of information to identify the right standards for you. And there are other sources as well that we're going to go through. Regulations in the EU and NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the US, is also playing a very important role in establishing rules for managing data. So here, it goes without saying that we do have a strong business case now for digital transformation around the world. I'm seeing it. I've been seeing it for the past 5-6 years. I mean, organizations in Canada and around the world are really moving from this analog world to a digital world where it's not only your handheld and your social media, but it's also everything behind the scene that is being automated. So we're seeing in organizations the adoption of a large number of digital technologies, from AI to robotic process automation, basically to connect the dots between legacy systems that don't talk to each other. We have bots and robots. E-commerce with the pandemic has exploded for large and medium and small organizations. Internet of Things, the IoT and IIoT for industrial applications, it is growing, exponential growth. So it creates tons of data. Organizations move with the pandemic, from servers in their offices to cloud. multi-cloud applications. It's going really fast, so fast that some people are saying we're getting close to the maximum capacity for cloud servers. So it looks like people have moved so fast to the cloud that we may have some problems with accessibility of the cloud in the future. And then Industry 4.0, which is basically using data and digital technologies to design and produce and manufacture goods. So it's everywhere. The drivers are structural in nature. It's not only a nice thing to do. It has become, transformation, this digital transformation has become a must do. You have to do it. And in my circles, in management and things, we labeled COVID-19 as the great accelerator of this because people had no choice. If you wanted to see a doctor, you could go online, which was impossible, even unthinkable 5 years ago, 4 years ago. But you also have these other structural trends, an aging workforce. Well, baby boomers are retiring by droves. And are not necessarily being replaced as quickly as some would like to. We're seeing the great resignation as well as a trend. People are moving from one job to the other. So, it's very difficult now for many organizations to actually deliver their goods or services that they've been created for, because they're having issues with enough staff and enough competent staff to do the work. On top of that, we used to live in a very globalized environment. Well, now we have more economic nationalism. We have shorter supply chains. We have issues with supply chains, in many countries. There's a lot of drivers out there to go from analog to digital. I mean, if you talk to the folks, the World Economic Forum in Davos, I mean, they talk about a lot of different things, but if you go in the back rooms, they're telling us, would it be nice if I could have a whole bunch of machines and robots and AI to actually run the company? The less people I have, the better it is. So there's a lot of interest in investing to become digital, and that investment is taking place now. People just don't have any choice. So organizations are, developing algorithms, adopting them or trying to adopt them, adopting robotics and a whole bunch of technologies. But as they're doing this, they discover, and they share this with us, that, it's nice to have a really well thought of algorithm, but you may have issues with the data itself. Data quality becomes an issue. Data access, getting the right data, high quality data that's fit for purpose is becoming, a real issue, because if you don't have, the right data sets or good quality data sets, your algorithms are not going to do the work they're supposed to do. A lot of issues as well with communication. Once you design an algorithm, how do you convince, your senior management and your board of directors that it is safe for consumption and that the risks are not too high? We've seen instances where hundreds of millions of dollars were invested in AI, but the board said no, because they saw this as a black box and explainability was not, they haven't met the test. So we see these kinds of issues, becoming front and center. What we're seeing as well is, contrary to the traditional ways that, the traditional functions in business, if you think about financial accounting, if you think about inventories, I mean, there are adequate systems and controls out there to manage tangible things and manage the finances. But for the digital economy, for these new tools that are being implemented, there's not necessarily the adequate systems and controls and the right controllership for data and for digital. It does not exist yet. So it's kind of falling between the cracks. We're not really sure who's accountable for this. And we're finding as well that, organizations want to go digital, but they're not necessarily sure where to start and how to start it, which projects to undertake, as opposed to, just go, shooting in the dark kind of approach. I mean, people want to invest in the real problems, biggest problems that can be managed or solved through data. You need strategies for that, and then you need governance. You need governance for that. And if you don't have, the right governance around your digital transformation strategies, there's a trust deficit that happens. Developers, senior management, boards, users, consumers, citizens will say, well, I'm not really sure that I'm happy with the outcomes for this thing. I don't really understand how it works, and I'm not really sure I trust the outcomes and the outputs. This is a survey that comes out annually. Edelman is a company that does this globally annually, and they have what is called a trust barometer. They've been doing this for 30 years, and in 2021, last year, they asked specific questions to about 30,000 people who get surveyed every year. How do you trust, what is your trust in digital technologies, but most importantly, for the purposes of that survey, in artificial intelligence? And as you see here, a lot of developed countries, economies, including Canada, are seeing a decrease, an annual decrease in trust by the public when it comes to how AI is developed and how it's deployed. So in Canada, we're at 39%. Last year, we were at 44% of people who trust the outcome of artificial intelligence. And it continues. That trust gap is increasing. So clearly, there's something that needs to be done to close that gap. So we're going to talk about this during the presentation today. And then in terms of the issues that people talk to us about when it comes to governance, these are some of the questions that, people ask. So, it goes from what types of problems can I solve with digital technologies? If I get data to develop an algorithm, is it high quality? Is it reliable? Is it fit for purpose? Those are kind of the questions that people are asking. If you go into an organization and you want to develop an algorithm, there's not necessarily in the organization a catalog of data sets. So searching for data sometimes become a real issue. So, finding the data is an issue, and then getting the right to access the data is another issue as well. You could have privacy issues, you could have ethical issues. Maybe there's a contract somewhere that keeps the data, to a particular user. So people are asking a lot of questions about, finding data. Where is it? And then once it's been located, can I access it? Can I use it? Can I benefit from it? And if I benefit from it, what should I give back? Because no data is completely free. Privacy, confidentiality is becoming another governance issue. At the federal level here in Canada, we'll have soon a new law on privacy. It's called the Digital Rights Act. And it's going to have some pretty hefty penalties if you release data, private data, or without the user's consent. So privacy is another filter that you need to worry about. At the bottom of this slide, there are as well, two things that aren't being done right now. If you develop a new digital technology, how do you make sure it works properly? And should I keep your word for it? In the world of consumer products, You have third-party certification. If you buy a TV, if you buy a computer, there are standards out there, and there are organizations that, labs that will test the product and certify that it works properly. Well, that thing just doesn't exist in the world of algorithms and RPAs and whatnot. So how do we create quality control? How do we manage verification and then basically stating that an algorithm is ethical or safe? These are kinds of questions that people are asking. How do we do this, and how do we explain outcomes of our implementing our digital technologies to senior management is also something that's on the mind of the leaders who are creating those new digital technologies. Am I going at the right pace here, Michael?
Absolutely. No, it's very interesting.
Okay. So just like, old functions like financial reporting or, the safety of your products, profitability, etc., you need accountability. So right now, when it comes to using data, data sharing, data reuse, I don't really see right now an accountability framework in organizations that exists. You don't have a chartered profession out there that is, responsible for controllership and compliance. So, who's in charge of this? I mean, I don't think right now data scientists who develop algorithms or mathematicians or statisticians have the tools that are required to, basically manage data controllership in organizations. Data engineers who are building the data pipeline so that you can find and use data are probably not able to do this as well. CFOs is, the acronym for chief financial officers. I mean, they're good at controlling, financial information, but, they haven't transferred their competencies to data controllership. Could it be the chief information officers? Should it be the privacy officers in organization? Who's in charge of controllership when it comes to data use, data sharing, and data reuse? That's an important question that people are asking. And then in terms of the professions, there's no, the jury is still out. I mean, in Canada, we haven't made a decision whether it should be the computer scientists, should it be the MBAs, engineers, lawyers, or chartered accountants. Who should be in charge of, the accountability framework to make sure that the data that is being used for digital transformation is managed properly? So that's a question that, will have to be answered at some point. I'll give you a few examples later about, ideas that are being circulated and tested in Europe. And I think we have a pathway that's being created slowly but surely. So I'll be using artificial intelligence as a use case here, just to get you to see the complexities of this thing. So AI, when you think about making sure that AI is safe, that is, trustworthy, then you need to look at where is AI being used. So in Europe and in the US, we're now starting to talk about making a clear distinction between AI that is embedded in products versus AI that is used to deliver a service. So we know right now that algorithms are being incorporated into a wide range of tangible products. So you have algorithms in TV sets, you have algorithms in infrastructure. I've seen really interesting examples of algorithms being embedded in elevators to make them more efficient. Transportation, energy, communications infrastructure. There are algorithms being inserted in chips, AI chips everywhere, to make the machines smarter in the way they operate. And there are, tremendous benefits to that. But if something goes wrong, how do we capture this, and how do we keep those machines and equipment safe? So that's the question that people are asking when it comes to tangible products. I talked to you about Industry 4.0 a few minutes ago. This is the idea that if you design a new washing machine, you can almost do the entire planning through digital twins, and the testing even can be done by simulations. So obviously AI and data are used tremendously here to design these new machines. But how do you make sure all of this works properly? How do you make sure that everything that you're doing is safe? We just don't have right now the tools to do that, but it's going to be coming at some point fairly soon. Now, the distinction we're making is, embedding AI in products versus using AI in services. And here, I give you examples. You know about them. It could be, call centers. It could be claim adjustments. If you use AI to basically look at images of vehicle accidents, you can quickly assess, the costs because you've trained an algorithm on thousands of images. It's everywhere. You can manage inventories. You can make recommendations to consumers about buying products or using services. It's everywhere. So here, we don't have at the moment a process, an approach to test and certify that these algorithms used in services are safe, that they are ethical, that they are trustworthy. So here, what we have to achieve in terms of governance is this basically achieving a balance between innovation, which is really important. We need it. We need innovation. We need new ideas to be translated into new products and services. But we need to balance this with safety. We need to make sure that people, are going to be safe. People won't die using this. And people won't be excluded. This is really important if you want organizations to continue to make progress on that front. We don't want Luddites to come in and break everything apart. So when you think about governance, then we think that it's going to be possible for testing laboratories to certify that AI is safe when it's embedded in machines and products. But we need a new approach to basically issue opinions about the safety of AI in services. And this is called, in my world, it is called assurance engagements. So I'll explain a little bit more what it means, but it's not certification. You cannot certify, you cannot state with 100% accuracy that something is safe and ethical. There's always judgment involved here. There's always a little bit of room for error. And then people need to make their decisions once they know about the risks. So just going back then to my two governance issues for products, the leader here in defining an approach to test and certify AI embedded in products has been taken by NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. They're going to come up very soon with detailed guidance on to basically manage AI systems for products. And they came up with a couple of years ago and last year with the principles on this slide. So, if you meet some tests, accuracy, explainability, resiliency, safety, and reliability, then it's possible to test these, and it's possible to use them in the real world and come up with, with some pretty accurate assessments of whether this thing is, if it fails, if it's going to kill somebody, or if it's going to, it's going to fail safely. So when it comes to standardizing AI in products, I think we have a pretty good path forward here. When it comes to standardizing AI in services, then you introduce values, right? It cannot be objective because it really depends on the circumstances. It depends on the values that people using the service have. It depends on, the ethical framework you're living under. So you need to add to the objective criteria, you need to add subjective criteria. So you may remember a couple of years ago, there was a declaration on AI, the safe use of AI was the Montreal Declaration. And they came up with a series of principles, that should be applied so that AI is deemed trustworthy. And they had, ethical issues. They talked about discrimination, but they also talked about, pretty broad principles like inclusive growth, sustainable development, well-being, that AI systems should contribute to beneficial outcomes. These are very interesting principles, but how do you make this into reality? How do you test an algorithm into a service that is provided and say that this one is okay, but this one is not okay? So this is where we're making progress. But it's really it's taking new ground basically because it does not really exist. So a lot of organizations have decided to think through what would be the guidance, what would be the governance of AI when you think about ethics. And the organization that really took a leading role in this is IEEE. It's IEEE. It's a standards body based in the US, but it's international. And they came up with a series of documents called Ethically Aligned Design. And it's a document that's been circulated for comments 3 or 4 times now. And they are designing now about 35, 40 standards to help developers, so data scientists, think through, the ethical issues associated with their work. So here are some examples are, addressing ethical concerns when you do your system design, ensuring you have transparency when it comes to your hypothesis and the data that you use, ensuring that the data that you use remains within the bounds of privacy legislation. How do you deal with algorithmic bias? They have a standard specifically to geared towards algorithms for providing services to kids, so child and student data governance. And robotics and automation systems. So I encourage you, there's the URL here. If you are interested in going a little deeper in terms of thinking through what are the ethical implications of the algorithm I'm developing for my employer, this is a really good source. You buy a copy of their standard and then you'll be able to, it's going to provide you with guidance on how to manage this properly. If you want to go further in terms of ethics, there's an organization called the ODI organization. They came up with something that's called a data ethics canvas. And it goes, it's kind of a, value chain in a sense. It starts with data sources right down to your actions. And it gives you a series of, it proposes a series of questions that you should ask yourself and actions that you should take, so that at the end of the day, when you complete your project, that you've thought through some of the issues that are associated with the ethical use of data. So you've got, it's not in a box here. You have to go and talk about the effects on people. You have to engage with people. You have to minimize impacts if you identify them, and you have to be very clear about the objectives of the algorithm you're developing. If you want to have fun, you can test your data ethics knowledge. So on this slide at the bottom right, there's a URL. You click on it, and there's a test there. It takes about 15 minutes. But it's going to give you a little bit of, it's going to whet your appetite in terms of what are the questions that you should ask yourself. And then it's going to ask you your opinion about a few things. And then you'll see, how you grade. It's going to grade I guess your knowledge level, but also your sensitivity to some of the ethical issues that can bog down any project, given that AI can impact your privacy, it can impact your democratic rights, it can impact whether you get a job or not. So it's pretty important. So we've talked about IEEE, we talked about data ethics. Now coming back to Canada, I talked to you at the beginning about the CIO Strategy Council. It's now become, on Monday, it's going to become the Digital Governance Council. And here, just to give you a sense of, the type of things they're working on, these are some of the published standards that came out in 2021 and 2022. So you'll see it's more than AI. It's because we have a standard for automated decision systems, the 101, but it's free for if you want to go and download it. It's going to give you a sense of what are the kind of key steps you want to take to basically document the development and the use of an AI system in an organization. It also focuses a lot on data governance, so digital protection, ensuring you have adequate third-party access to data, de-identification for privacy purposes. There's a bunch of standards being developed now by this organization for the health sector, because hospitals and research institutions want to share data, but right now they're kind of bogged down. Their lawyers are telling them they're not allowed to. So we're going to need a whole bunch of standards to establish a governance framework so that data sharing can take place in the healthcare sector. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, digital identity. I think there's going to be 7 or 8 of standards so that we replace our social insurance numbers. This is the analog world, to digital identity, digital identifiers. In Ontario, it's going to be, it's going to be part of the regulations very soon. So you're going to see a big move on the part of governments and industry towards, digital identifiers for consumers and citizens. So there's lots of stuff happening there in terms of standardization for digital governance. I recommend that you go to this website from time to time to see the new standards that are coming out. It's always helpful to see the guidance that's embedded in there to guide you. So, when it comes to AI governance, we have an approach in Canada. It's a tentative approach, but we have basically 3 worldviews colliding. In Europe, clearly, a whole bunch of regulations are going to be come down the pipe when it comes to AI. It's regulations to protect data. It's also regulations to protect European industry from, China and the US basically taking over their data sets and reducing their competitiveness. So Europe is going with a kind of an iron curtain when it comes to data. In the US, it's an open market, open data flows. We have national champions. We have huge platforms that are, international, global in nature. There are some talks about regulating platforms in the US. Clearly, it's there. But, the culture in the US is to let people do what they have to do. And if there are harms being created people can go to court and ask for, redress. So that culture is not going to change. We're not going to see a whole bunch of, in my opinion, constraining regulations when it comes to AI in the US. And then in China, we have obviously a national firewall, but we also have a lot of new progressive regulations and legislation when it comes to the management of artificial intelligence. Mind you, it's very integrated in China, and data sets are traveling from one estate to the other. So it remains to be seen how it's going to be managed at the national level over there. But three different approaches. In Canada, we have, some, when it comes to AI, some developments. We have the digital charter that's coming with the potential creation of a data commissioner and a digital commissioner, in addition to a privacy commissioner. And then we have a series of strategies and guidance from Treasury Board. But in Ontario as well, we have a digital strategy, but we don't have a lot of constraining regulations yet. But really where it's happening in terms of AI and, mandatory governance, it's in the EU. They introduced their Artificial Intelligence Act last year. They introduced this concept of high-risk AI. And as I said before, they're taking a two-track approach to this. So on the one hand, if your algorithm is embedded in a tangible product, and it's a product that can harm people, they're going to use the traditional standards and certification system to test it. But when it comes to AI systems delivering services, there are lots of high-risk AI, like biometric identification, that is going to be forbidden. And for others, they're going to be asking that organizations create risk management systems within the organizations to test and attest that their algorithms are safe. So as I said, in the US, we have some legislative developments in the Senate, in the House. So we can take a look at that. But if I was developing algorithms for the US market, I'd be looking at the standards that NIST is developing as a starting point. And then in China, as I said, a lot of stuff coming down the pipe when it comes to the regulation of AI. So AI is just one example where we're seeing, standards. We're seeing new approaches to certify this. We're seeing regulations and laws being introduced. But it's not the only place. I mean, we're going to get to the same place when it comes to distributed ledgers and robotics. It's going to get regulated. There's going to be governance being imposed. So organizations need to get ready then for managing this. And what I wanted to share with you today is as you do your work, as you think about developing, testing, and implementing algorithms, think about it through a value chain. So what we've proposed at CIGI, and it's accepted as well in the world of CPAs, is that we have basically three steps in a value chain when it comes to using data. We have data collection. We have, which is a task in itself. We have data access, which is the controllership part. And you need to achieve that. You need to do this before you get to the analytics. And the three are kind of interdependent. But if for many years, people focused a lot on AI and didn't think about privacy issues, access issues, and then went upstream about data. and realize that they need to think about, basically where is the data and what kind of quality is the data in. And now we realize that we're going to need to segment, create, there's a segmentation in this, and we're going to need to create new professional classes basically to deal with all of the issues associated with managing data. So it's in, as I said, it's in 3 steps. I added the 4th one in terms of communication, but I think you'll see, a logic here. So if you start, you identify a problem that you want to solve, you want to do some analytics. The first thing you're gonna ask yourself is, where's the data? So the first step in the data value chain is really, the action of identifying, gathering, cleaning, and grading data. And here, the profession that seems to be, becoming more adept at this is kind of defined as the data engineer, right? It's the person who's going to design and implement data pipelines so that the data scientist can have access to data. So we see a lot of issues associated with data quality, finding the data, making sure that the data is labeled properly, that the attributes of the data are well understood. Here we talk about metadata, so it's the data about the data. Some professions are pretty good at this. People in meteorology have huge guidance documents on describing their weather stations and how the weather stations work, and how the weather station instruments are installed and maintained. That's metadata. That's information you need to figure out what is the quality of the actual weather data that I get. The same ideas, the same concepts need to be applied to any data set that you want to use for the purposes of analytics. You want to make sure that this step of the data value chain is well done, and you want to know what you're getting into when it comes to data collecting, ensuring that it's clean, comparable, your data sets are complete, all of these things, so that you don't get any surprises there. And there are no systems and controls right now, and there are no really standards to assess and report, on the quality of a data set. This is an art still, but there must be ways of developing criteria so that you can actually put a grade on a data set given the problem that you're trying to solve. So I think there's a lot of scope here to basically design and implement guidance to reach this goal of getting high quality data to meet your needs. So that's the first step in the data value chain that I propose today to you guys. The second step in the data value chain is data access and sharing, because it's pretty clear that organizations are generally not very comfortable with opening up their books. If you're a data scientist, you come in, data access is an issue. It's not guaranteed that you're going to have access to the data that you want or need immediately. There are lots of filters, there are lots of barriers to data access. And sometimes these barriers are kind of arbitrary. So here, in terms of the value chains, what we think needs to happen is that, for the purposes of data sharing and data reuse, it'd be nice in organizations to have a data controller. So a person who is accountable to basically find data sets, data sources, making sure that they're fit for purpose, and then applying filters so that those requesting or looking for data to get their work done have access to the right data at the right place and at the right time. So that's not a free-for-all, because we know if it's a free-for-all, at some point you're going to break a law or regulation or a contract somewhere. So data access and rules for data access is very important if you want to maintain trust, if you want to keep your senior management happy, if you want to reduce the risk. It's right now what we see is that a lot of organizations that have a lot of data are operating in silos and don't necessarily want the culture to data sharing is not really there. If you make this step in the data value chain clear, then it's going to be easier for various branches and silos in organizations to actually share the data. If you have controllership, it becomes easier to share and reuse data. Then the third part is the part that everybody talks about. That's the analytics. So you can have AI, you can have, it could be about business intelligence. It could be anything you want. It could be robots. It could be humans as well. I mean, analytics can be done by a lot of different people. Well, when you think about AI, it's generally the data scientist that's going to design the machine learning tool and test it and model it and then come up with the insights. So this one is known. It's the stuff upstream that needs to take place properly so that the whole thing works together. So the value chains, I think if we are to look at, going through digital transformation and thinking about data sharing and data reuse, in these three buckets or four buckets, if you think about communications, it makes it easier, I think, for people to understand what are the challenges and what are the opportunities associated with the work you want to do. But what we found in terms of governance is that, the first thing that you need to do is that, you need to set priorities, because resources are scarce. You can't, apply an algorithm to any problem. You need to get, approval. You need a budget, and then you need to demonstrate that, doing this actually delivers results, and you can account for the results, and then repeat after that. So what we're saying to organizations that want to go digital, that want to go and get into AI, is that, set priorities, start small first, and then, ensure that your digitization strategy matches your overall, strategic direction. This is how you can create little teams, multidisciplinary teams with experts who know about the problems that you're trying to solve. You don't do this as an island. And then upstream, those who have designed, the data sets can actually help you understand what are the issues associated with their data. And it applies to large organizations as well as smaller ones. SMEs are also interested in going digital. And they also need, guidance on this so that, the resources they have at their disposal are being invested in the right place. And then you need to establish, once you have a strategy, then you need to establish the clear rules for data sharing and reuse. So I've published a couple of things on this. It's on the CPA website. And the article is called Corporate Data Policy and its Elements. So it's going to help you establish the rules so that everybody understands what it's about, and you get, a common purpose in the organization. Some of the key things you want to cover in that corporate data policy is, first of all, common definitions and terms. This is a no-brainer, but I can tell you I'm in charge of a lexicon at the CIO Strategy Council. We have a whole bunch of different standards, and I had 12 standards that were published last year, and I had 12 different definitions of data. And I think I had 8 different definitions, of sharing or something like that. I mean, it was just bizarre. There's so many different definitions of something that I thought was pretty straightforward occurred, and now, you know, we understand that people have different viewpoints. You know, a lawyer's definition of data is different than an engineer, is different than a CFO. And these people need to talk to each other, and they need to understand what the heck they're doing. So I think you need to have, you know, get clarity on common definitions when it comes to data sharing and data reuse. Data ownership and IP and copyright is essential here. If as an organization you decide that data is a commodity that can be shared, or can be, you know, can be shared within the organization or shared outside of the organization, like, it has value, right? So you need to assert control over it. But how do you do that? So organizations need to think about that. How do I, if I want to share data with somebody, do I sell it? Do I, you know, is it a loan? Is it, you know, do I want to see it? Do I want to track it as it's being, you know, used in an algorithm? Do I want to get benefits out of that? So ownership is very important here. Before you get data sharing, you need to get the lawyers to agree on you know, the mechanism that you're going to use to assert ownership of your own data. And then tagging and tracking. You want to make sure that you know where your data is going, because you don't want it to be used for illegal things. Compliance with the various rules and regulation should be part of your policy as well, because it would be dangerous to start going and use data if, you know, you have you know, privacy information in there, private information in there. You don't want to go to jail. You don't want the privacy commissioner to, you know, to open up an audit on you. So you need to understand what these laws and regulations are for, and you need to be within the realms there. And then in addition to regulations, we talked about, you know, the ethics. Well, you need a filter as well for that. You need to say in your corporate data policy that whatever you produce is going to be safe, it's going to be ethical, and I'll be able to explain it to senior management. Some organizations will want to make sure that data is, you know, is housed within Canada. So governments will say this, servers need to be located in Canada. So in your policy, you need to be clear on that. And then accountability clearly is important. Who's in charge of managing that policy is important. And you'd be surprised, there are not that many organizations with up-to-date corporate data policy when it comes to data sharing and reuse. I don't know of many. I wish I did, because then I could share, you know, the policies with you guys, but it's not there yet. We're not there yet, and we need to. Then the fourth step in my value chain is communicating results and basically fostering, you know, a feeling of trust between all of these stakeholders. If you break the trust once, then it's very hard to make you know, the system work properly. So it means you need to be a strategic advisor once the algorithm is in place or is developed and needs to be approved. You need to, you know, to communicate the intent and the methodology and the outcomes very clearly, so that your chief legal officer and your privacy officer and your board is on board. Whether you're in the private sector or not for profit, the risk of data misuse is high, and it needs to be managed properly. Last thing in my value chain as well, and again, it goes way beyond, you know, your work as a data scientist, but I was at a call just before this presentation about, you know, the new Competition Act that's coming up in Canada, and people were saying, geez, we have no methodology right now to assess and report on the value of our data sets. Is it worth a lot? Is it worth a little bit? Is there a negative value to our data because it has a whole bunch of risk if it ever gets out? This question needs to be addressed as well when it comes to data governance. So it's not only about cost, you know, how many hours of work do I need to invest to create a data set, but it's also about the value down the road that this data is going to bring. So another point to think about and remember as you think through, you know, this big governance apparatus that you need to be successful. I think I'm at my last slide now. So if you are, graduating, getting into an organization, these are kind of the things that you need to think about. And there's no, there's no guidebook out there. There's nobody really in charge of this. And people are, I think, all interested in making digital transformation a success. So clearly, we need people to push for the adoption of digital technologies in organization. We need to think about data in terms of value chains, so we understand, the various angles that we need to act on. We need strategies, so it's easier to solve, pretty precise problems as opposed to go and try to boil the ocean. You need a policy. Eventually, you'd need a data controller somewhere. It could be an additional role to somebody who's already there, but you need somebody who's in charge of this so that keep everybody honest. I'm adding here audit and assurance. Eventually, you'll need a third party to look at what you've done and say, yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of, it's risk management for you. It's a demonstration of due diligence as well, if ever there's a problem. And if you do all of this, the end result will be that you'll be injecting trust in your digital ecosystem. And the likelihood that you'll be successful is a lot higher if you've covered these bases, as opposed to just develop an algorithm and hope for the best. So, Michael, I don't know if I went overboard. My clock disappeared.
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. I mean, that was fantastic, Michel. Really appreciate it. So much to take in, so much information. Do you have 10 minutes for a Q&A, Michel? Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Does
I may
anybody-
not be able to answer, the questions properly, but if I don't have the answer, I can certainly go back and research and think and send you an email back so that you can share it with your team.
Oh, that'd be great. So first off, does anybody have any questions? If not, I have a couple. I think that'll be particularly useful to our audience. And I guess let me start off. When we think of verification, or we think about the value of an audit or assurance engagement, we think about the expertise that CPAs provide for financial accounting. And now it seems like, the CPA profession is going to try to, get into this space. From an educational perspective, do you think that we need to fundamentally change our approach to education? Do we have to incorporate more analytics? Do we have to incorporate more data? How do we do that? Do we sort of partner with computer science programs? Do we, is accounting going to become sort of like a graduate program that students do afterwards? Do you see anything, Michel, on how the education system is going to change? Because clearly this is going to be a big opportunity, that somebody with these skill sets, that can provide the assurance will be in a pretty, favorable position from a job perspective.
Absolutely. Michael, this is such a good question because you go at the core of data controllership. Accountants, CPAs, for financial information, they have two roles. They have a stewardship role and they have, a controllership role. And the tools that accountants have developed over the past 200 years to manage financial information is, these tools and these competencies can be transferred to data value chains. And there's nobody else, I believe, in the marketplace right now that, could do a good job at this, given, the skills and the interests as well of the various professions. So clearly there's an opportunity here. So when I talk to the folks at CPA Canada and CPA Ontario, I hear two things. The first one is that, there is an urgent need to transform the profession so that the profession can learn about, the data economy and digital governance, and then apply what it knows, what it uses for financial information, apply it to digital. So there is a need to transform the profession. There is a need to update the competency map for CPAs so that, we're focusing on the right competencies. I mean, there's a lot more collaboration here that is required. There's a lot more, ability, if you want, to live or to operate in a gray zone as opposed to black and white. You navigate in uncertainty when you manage, algorithms and data quality. So that's another competency that needs to be thought through, and then you need to equip people so that they can do this work. And then from a technology perspective, CPAs would need to learn about value chains and learn about these new digital technologies. So it'd be good for CPAs to learn coding and to learn, Python and to become adept at, questioning, the quality of a data set or whether it's complete or not. Now, let me give you an example, Michael, of what's happening elsewhere. In the UK, last year, the UK government said that when it comes to high-risk AI for services, the algorithms used in the services sector, they're thinking about creating a new hybrid profession. And that profession would be using all of the guidance that CPA are routinely using for financial information and translating this to data. But it'd be a profession where, teams of accountants, data scientists, and data engineers, would work together. So it could be an entirely new profession, but I'm not sure that, it's really workable. I think that at the end of the day, in the UK, CPAs will be the designated assurance provider, and they will have an obligation to have on their teams and consult with data scientists and engineers and statisticians to actually come up with, pretty solid opinions of whether a system works and is safe or ethical or not. So in the UK, there is, it's happening. In the EU, they're going through the same process, because what's the point of having a regulation for high-risk AI if you can't do an audit, right? So we need controllership, but we also need auditing, and that concept of a new hybrid profession is now firmly being discussed, and it's going to happen. So.
No, I think that's great. And I think this is sort of related to Larissa's question. So Larissa is asking, could you speak more about AI explainability? How should companies deal with the challenge of black box problem? And I think that's sort of intertwined with this audit idea, right? If we can show that, at least, we know that AI is proprietary. We know that there's going to be some advantage. You don't want to share information, but if we can have some external verification, maybe through CPA process, maybe through something like an ISO from manufacturing, that'll alleviate the concern. Can you speak to that, Michel? Or?
Yes, well, again, a very good question. I'm glad you guys are, you're right on the ball here. In the EU, I think there's still a debate about black box. If the algorithm and the machine learning tool learns on its own, but you cannot trace and explain the learning process, I'm not really sure if it's going to be allowed in the EU. There still is a debate on this. The draft of the legislation said black box is not going to be allowed. It's going to be forbidden in the EU, but there's been a lot of pushback on that. So yes, the concept here would be that you would have a certified third party who would have access to the actual algorithm, the data sets, and could apply those subjective tests, if you want, on this in order to issue an opinion. So I think it's safe to say that the algorithms that are not the black box self-learning algorithms clearly can be managed in terms of explainability through this third-party audits and assurance. For the self-learning ones, I think we've got a little bit more work to do to come up with a methodology where you could actually get some replicability. So if you get the black box and use it elsewhere, is it going to come up with the same results? That could be one way of dealing with this. Yeah.
So I suppose I have another question, because one thing that really stood out in your presentation for me was just this tremendous difference in trust between countries. right? We saw on one end, I think it was at 75, and then at one end was 30%, something like that. Do you think that the countries that are going to sort of spearhead this innovation in data governance are going to be those countries concentrated on the right side of your graph, i.e. the countries with the lowest trust? And then do you think that, sort of once we have one country that becomes the leader, it's like a follow suit game where one country has invested heavily, we've seen the results, we should now follow their standards or at least work off their standards? Or do you think it'll continue to be sort of this EU versus China versus US, et cetera?
Yes. Again, thank you for the question, Michael. I totally agree with you on that front. The countries that were at the right hand of the slide, where the trust was the lowest, are the countries where the most work is being done to establish proper, solid governance mechanisms. So the UK, I think, was the one with the lowest level of trust. So for them, because values are different, from one region of the world to the other. Some people distrust authority naturally. Others are very trustful of their leaders and of bureaucracies or large organizations, and are not, don't feel that it's their, that they have to do much on this. So I think that's where it's going to happen. The UK, and I think in the US, we shouldn't think that the US is going to be kind of a sea of winner takes all. I mean, the legal system in the US is such that if there are some important mishaps happening, the big tech platforms are at some point going to be brought to court and going to have to pay up. So there is a risk management, component here that needs to be added to this. Generally, I think the countries with the strongest democratic institutions, where people are kind of distrust, don't have a high trust factor for, their business leaders, the associations, the journalists. These are the places where the most work is going to happen, because that imbalance is just not sustainable. You can't have this happening for a long time. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and if you're a global organization, you're probably going to have to adhere to the most stringent policies, right?
Yeah.
So, Michel, that was fantastic. We have no more questions. For everybody on the call, I think really take to heart what Michel said. There's tremendous opportunity for each and every one of you on this call to get into this space. The space is going to be changing very quickly. It's a very exciting time to be a student, as Michel said. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me. Take a look at Michel's presentation. We can talk more about it offline. But with that said, thank you for this presentation. We have another seminar series next week where we have IBM coming in. Stay safe, everyone. Get home safe. The roads are probably not the best. So safe travels. Thank you for attending. And once again, thank you, Michel, for joining us. It was an absolute honor, pleasure, and we really learned a lot from your presentation. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you, Michael. Bye for now.